The prairie lay open like an old wound beneath the dying light, a vast expanse of tall grass shivering in the breathless hush of dusk. Colors melted slowly from gold to rust, and the horizon blurred with dust and memory. Somewhere far off, a bird cried once, and then fell silent. A solitary figure moved across the land with the slow certainty of someone who had crossed it many times before. His shape was part of the landscape. Worn hat pulled low, back slightly bent, long coat faded to the color of dry earth. He rode without haste, as if time no longer demanded much of him. The horse beneath him was a tall roan, speckled with white, and the dust of miles, but its steps had grown uneven. Each movement seemed to echo through the saddle into the cowboy's spine. He noticed. He said nothing, only loosened the reins and let the animal choose the way. Evening thickened. Shadows stretched like old scars across the ground. The man dismounted with care, boots thudding softly in the grass. The horse wavered beside him, hind leg trembling as it fought to stay upright. The cowboy placed a steadying hand on its neck, feeling the heat, the uneven shudder of its breath. There was no town in sight, no rail line, no sound but wind brushing through cholla and sage. He led the horse to a crooked juniper tree, its limbs twisted skyward as if in silent protest. There he unsaddled it, each motion slow, deliberate, quiet as a prayer. The blanket beneath was soaked with sweat, and the horse's ribs heaved visibly in the fading light. He didn't tie it. There was no need. He set up camp with the same care. A ring of stones, a pile of brushwood, the touch of flint to steel. The fire was small. It needed only to give light, not comfort. Comfort was no longer a useful thing. The horse sank to its knees. Labored breath rasped through its nostrils like wind through reeds. The cowboy crouched beside it. Watched? He didn't speak. Words would have been wrong somehow. Instead, he pulled a worn blanket from his pack and laid it gently across the horse's back. Then he sat beside it, cross-legged, eyes lost in the flicker of flame, one hand still resting on the horse's neck. Its coat was dry and hot, twitching beneath his fingers with each failing breath. Behind them, the prairie stretched on in every direction, unending and empty. But it wasn't a cruel emptiness, it was solemn. A stillness that seemed to lean in and listen. The cowboy's eyes, dark beneath the brim of his hat, never blinked. He just sat, watching the fire, hand on the animal that had carried him through more years than anyone else ever had. Above them, the sky deepened into ink. Stars appeared without ceremony, scattered like forgotten prayers. The moon had not yet risen. The cowboy reached into his coat, drew out a tin cup and a flask, and poured a quiet shot of whiskey. He placed the cup on the ground, untouched. Then he took the flask and pressed a few drops to the horse's cracked lips. It didn't move. Its eyes were half closed now, clouded, unfocused. He looked past the flames, past the horizon. His gaze went further than the land, into something unspoken, a place where names had lost meaning and only acts remained. A breeze lifted, gentle and warm. It ruffled the tall grass, bent the fire's smoke sideways. The man blinked once, looked at the horse, still breathing, barely. He laid a hand on the animal's shoulder again, thumb brushing the fur like one might trace the edge of a memory. He remembered the first ride, years ago when the horse was young and wild and had nearly thrown him in the river. That had been in another place, another version of himself. And now, here they were. He didn't cry. His face was still. The lines around his mouth spoke enough. Of endurance, of gratitude, of loss too old to name. Far off, a coyote called. Then, silence again. He sat there until the moon rose, pale and ghostly, silvering the prairie with a light that made everything look distant, as if glimpsed through water. The horse shivered once, exhaled deeply, settled. The man didn't move. He only adjusted the blanket, stoked the fire, shifted closer so that the warmth might reach them both. The earth turned quietly beneath them, and somewhere far beyond sight, a wind stirred that carried with it the smell of horses. But the cowboy stayed where he was, watching, waiting, listening. The fire crackled softly, and the stars kept their silence. Night settled like a long sigh, slow and full of old sorrow. The sky above the prairie was deep and wide, black velvet brushed with silver stars. No moon now, only the hush of things too old to speak. The fire had burned low, flickering gently, its smoke rising thin and straight into the still air, as if the earth itself were whispering something to the heavens. The cowboy sat cross-legged by the fading warmth, the horse lying inches from his boots. Its chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm, a wheeze now trailing each exhale. The breath sounded wet, like water in a dying creek bed. He listened to it, not out of hope. He knew better, but because there was nothing else in the world to listen to anymore. His coat was wrapped around the horse, old leather laid over thin fur. The animal's head rested on the bare dirt. One eye half closed, lashes fluttering now and then, like it was dreaming of younger days. Or maybe remembering. The line between dreams and memory is a fine one in the West. The cowboy reached for a stick and poked the fire, more for the sound of it than the flame. Sparks jumped into the air and vanished. He leaned forward, the light tracing his face in soft gold, a map of weather and years. One of his hands was scarred along the knuckles, the skin shiny and pale. His other hand pressed gently into the horse's side, feeling the pulse, faint and fluttering, like a moth trapped beneath a pane of glass. Somewhere to the north a wind stirred the grass, soft but low, and it carried with it the faintest sound. Hooves, maybe, but far off, too distant to be certain. The cowboy didn't look. He didn't need to. He knew the sounds of horses in the dark, but these were not hurried. They were slow, measured, almost like breathing, like the land was remembering. He let the sound pass. A minute or an hour later, time had become as fluid as smoke. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small tin box. He opened it, revealing folded papers, tobacco, a match. He rolled a cigarette, the motion slow and precise, like he was working with something sacred. He lit it with a match struck against his boot sole, and the flare of flame illuminated the hollow of his cheeks, the deep-set eyes, the cracked lips pressed tight. He didn't smoke often, not anymore, but tonight called for it. He sat back and watched the curl of smoke rise from the tip, mixing with the cold air. He held it between his fingers like a prayer stick, letting it burn at its own pace. Then he tilted his head toward the stars and exhaled. Behind him, the horse shifted, legs twitching slightly. The cowboy turned, spoke for the first time. "You can go if you're ready." The voice was rough, dry. It came from somewhere low in his chest, not quite meant for ears. The horse blinked, or maybe the shadows just moved. He stared into the animal's face, not searching for anything, just being there, the way one might sit beside a friend who's dying and knows you won't lie to them. A small gust stirred the coals. They flared red, then settled again. The cowboy reached out and pulled the saddle blanket over the horse's flank. It was stiff now. Blood and sweat dried into the weave. He smoothed it down once. His hand lingered, then slowly returned to his knee. He looked at the fire again, letting the orange light wash over his features. There was something calm in his stillness. Not peace, exactly, but the kind of resolve that comes when you stop waiting for a world to offer more than it can. The stars above had shifted, new constellations visible now, the kind that only come out after midnight, the kind sailors used to trust more than maps. The cowboy lifted his head and squinted into the dark. Again, the sound of hooves, this time clearer, but not near, not threatening, like a dream remembered half asleep, like a lullaby with no words. His hand dropped to his side, brushing the ground. He pulled a small object from the dust, a leather pouch laced at the top, heavy with coin or maybe medicine. He untied it slowly and took something out, a small charm made of horsehair, braided into a circle. He turned it between his fingers. His mouth opened, then closed again. No words. Instead, he leaned over and tucked it beneath the horse's front leg, where it would not be seen, but could still be carried. The horse's breathing hitched. A long pause. Then a wheeze. The cowboy reached out and touched its forehead just once. The hide was damp. He smoothed it down gently, his thumb lingering in the hollow between the eyes. A gesture older than language. He leaned back, cigarette now burned down to the filter. He dropped it into the fire, which hissed in response. Another sound, this time from the west. A branch cracking. The wind seemed to fold around it, as if protecting the moment. He looked, but there was only grass, only dark. Still, he could feel something moving, not danger, something else. The kind of presence that doesn't come near out of fear, but stays near out of respect. He looked up again, and for a moment, maybe less than a second, the cowboy thought he saw shapes moving on the horizon, low, slow, like mist curling into the shape of horses. No sound, no light, just form and rhythm. Then gone. He didn't move. Instead, he poured a second cup of whiskey and set it beside the first. He sat through the rest of the night without shifting. The fire dimmed to embers. The horse lay still, and around them, the prairie breathed and listened and waited. By the time the first pale thread of dawn slipped into the eastern sky, the cowboy had closed his eyes, not asleep, just quiet. A man with nothing left to chase. But something was coming, not behind him, ahead, and in the still air the faintest tremble of earth could be felt, as if many hooves, not galloping, not rushing, were drawing near, not to take, but to witness. The sky had not yet turned to light, but the stars were fading, that quiet, reluctant unraveling of night where shadows begin to remember their edges. The fire had collapsed into a bed of faint coals, their glow breathing shallowly under a fine layer of ash. The cowboy sat unmoving, arms folded over his knees, chin tucked into his chest. He hadn't slept. The horse hadn't stirred. It lay on its side now, legs stiffening into a final stillness. Its ribs no longer moved. The leather coat he'd laid over it had slipped partway down, bunched up over one haunch. The stillness wasn't violent. No thrashing, no groans, only the quiet yielding of something old and tired. The cowboy's eyes were open. He looked not at the body, but past it, toward the long, black line of the horizon. His hat sat low over his brow, the brim casting a soft arc of shadow that curved around his cheekbones. He looked carved from the same earth he sat upon. His boots were dusted gray, his hands were still. There was a wind now, low and searching. It passed through the grass without sound, lifting dew from the blades. It stirred the ashes gently, carried away the smoke from the cold fire, and brushed past the cowboy's face like a question that didn't need answering. Then, through the silence, came the sound again, distant, measured, hooves. He turned his head slightly, not in alarm, more like recognition, like he'd heard a name he hadn't spoken in years. Far off across the open prairie, a shape was moving, then another and another. He didn't rise. He only squinted into the dark, waiting for the light to confirm what his bones already knew. Wild horses. They came not in a rush, not like storm or stampede, but slowly, at a walk, like ghosts returning home. Their silhouettes grew clearer with each step into the thinning dark. No riders, no noise, but the soft rhythm of hoof over dry soil. 20, maybe more. All colors, bays and grays. A white one with a streak of black down its flank. A dun with a ragged mane like it had come through fire. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting the last of the stars. The cowboy stood, slowly, brushing his coat down with one hand. He stepped away from the fire pit, boots crunching softly. He didn't go to meet them. He simply stood beside the body of his horse, hands at his sides, as the herd approached. They stopped at a distance first, about 30 yards out, clustered loosely, nostrils flaring, ears up. They didn't scatter. They didn't flee. Their gaze fixed on the cowboy, then on the roan lying still at his feet. A long silence held, the kind of silence that feels full, not absence, but presence. like the land itself was watching. Then the led mare stepped forward. She was tall, her coat dappled with gray and silver, her eyes dark and clear. She walked slowly, pausing every few paces, until she stood just 10 feet away. She lowered her head, not to graze, not to sniff, just down and still. The cowboy removed his hat. The herd followed. One by one, the wild horses stepped forward, each in silence, each bowing its head toward the body of the roan. Some held the gesture for seconds, others lingered longer. None touched, none neighed. They made no sound at all. They simply stood in reverent hush. Animals who had never been saddled, never been shod, showing something that could not be taught. The cowboy did not cry. He looked at them, every line of his face unreadable, yet heavy with weight. He ran a hand through the roan's mane, now tangled with sweat and dust. He adjusted the coat over the body. The dun with the scorched-looking mane stepped forward last. He didn't bow right away. He circled the scene once, slow and wary, then stopped beside the dead horse's head and lowered his nose to the earth. Not a touch, just breath, then stillness. The cowboy finally spoke. "Good ride," he murmured almost to himself. His voice was raw like gravel. Then he turned and walked back to the fire pit. He squatted, took a handful of cold ash, and scattered it over the flames. A few tiny embers flared briefly, then darkened. The wind shifted. The herd remained a little longer, unmoving. Then, as if stirred by some unspoken cue, they turned, not in unison, but with shared timing, and began to drift away into the misty blue of pre-dawn. Some looked back, most didn't. They vanished one by one into the grass, fading into silhouettes again. Then the silhouettes faded into nothing. The cowboy stood alone now, beside the roan. He looked once more across the horizon. No fences, no rails, no towns, just land, waiting, remembering. He adjusted his hat, knelt, and began gathering stones. One at a time, flat ones, heavy ones, warm from the earth. He said no words while he worked. None were needed. His hand spoke, placing, shaping, stacking a cairn, small, rounded, a shape older than language, a marker that said something mattered here. When he was done, he stood back, hands gray with dust, arms limp at his sides. He didn't look at it long, just nodded once, faint and final. The wind passed again, and with it, the faintest sound, hooves again, far off now, fading west or maybe east, hard to say. The cowboy sat down, legs folded beneath him, and stared at the place where the fire had been. Behind him, the cairn stood silent over the body of a good horse. In front of him, the prairie stretched forever. He lit another cigarette, eyes fixed on nothing, and waited for the sun to rise. Dawn was not swift. It did not burst or blaze. It came like a tide rising over the edges of sleep, slow, reluctant, deliberate. The first light touched the land as a suggestion rather than an announcement, a faint whitening at the seams of darkness. It revealed the world not in full, but in slow brush strokes, pale color gathering where shadow had ruled. The cowboy sat where he had been, legs crossed, his back a crooked silhouette against the awakening sky. His hat was tipped forward, hiding his eyes. The cigarette between his fingers had long since gone out, its ash fallen in a soft curl beside his boot. He hadn't moved in over an hour, not since the last wild horse had faded into the prairie's veil. The cairn beside him stood low and humble, a collection of stones gently placed over the hollow where the horse now lay beneath the earth. It wasn't high, just enough to mark, enough to hold the weight of what was gone. A morning wind crept in from the east. It was different now, not the dry whisper of midnight, but a cleaner breeze touched by the cold clarity of first light. It moved through the grass like a hand smoothing a wrinkled quilt, bending the prairie in long ripples. It lifted the dust from the cowboy's coat and stirred the smoke that had sunk into the fibers. He raised his head. Lines scored his face like cracks in old stone. His eyes were bloodshot, but not from tears, only from the long keeping of silence. He rubbed the corner of one eye with a knuckle, then stood slowly. His joints ached with the stiffness of the night, but he didn't wince. He just rose like someone used to pain. His horse was gone. But not in the way things vanish in the West. Not stolen, not broken by battle or flood. Gone in the way a fire dies after it's burned exactly as long as it needed to. A good death, a rare thing. The cowboy walked to the cairn and laid his palm against the topmost stone. It was still warm from the night's fire. He left his hand there a moment as if listening. Then he stepped back. The sky had shifted to blue now, a pale, thin blue, like it hadn't quite decided whether to be day yet. Low clouds hovered on the horizon, like the backs of sleeping animals. The ground held dew in the hollows. Every blade of grass shimmered with it. Then the wind stopped. It didn't die. It didn't fade. It simply held its breath. And in that pause, the sound came again. Hooves, but not distant this time. Closer. The cowboy turned his head, slow and patient. Out of the low light they emerged. The herd again, or another just like it. Silent, solemn, unchanged by the passage of hours. They came not from where the others had gone, but from a different direction. North, maybe northeast. Dozens of them, quiet, intentional, no snorts, no stamping, just the steady sound of hooves over dew-wet ground. The cowboy did not step forward. He remained beside the cairn, arms hanging loose. He watched them come, and they watched him in return. At the front of the group, a young stallion, sleek, dark as oil, with a white blaze down its forehead. It paused at the edge of the camp, nostrils flaring, ears twitching. Then, slowly, it walked to the cairn and lowered its head. Behind it, the rest of the herd did the same. No hurry, no fear. Just that same quiet understanding. One by one they approached the stones, bowed, stepped aside. The sun, not yet visible, cast its prelude in a widening band across the eastern sky. The light caught their coats, turned them silver at the edges, rimmed each ear and mane with gold. They looked like something not quite real, like they had stepped out of time. The cowboy stood, hat still in hand, and as the last of the horses bowed, he did something he hadn't done in a very long while. He knelt. It wasn't a collapse. It wasn't grief. It was a gesture, not to the horses, not even to the roan beneath the cairn, but to the land itself, to the great quiet expanse that had given him his companion and now had taken it back. He placed his hand on the earth, pressed it flat. The soil was cool, damp. It clung to his skin. When he rose, he looked older. The herd began to turn, their heads lifted, their hooves shifted softly. But they didn't leave, not yet. The dark stallion walked closer, stopped just beyond arm's reach. Its eyes were steady and calm. The cowboy looked at it, not with expectation, but with regard. There was no invitation in his posture, only acceptance. The stallion bowed its head once more, then turned, and the herd followed. This time they moved faster, not running, but eager now, purposeful, as if whatever they had come to do was finished and the day was calling them elsewhere. They vanished into the distance, their forms swallowed by the curve of land, the bending grass, the rising light. The cowboy stood alone again. He didn't saddle up. There was no horse. He didn't pack his things. He had left them already. He only stood. The sun rose at last. Not grand, not sudden, just there, lifting over the edge of the world. Its first beam struck the cairn and held. The cowboy placed his hat back on his head. He took one last look at the horizon, the direction the herd had gone, and then turned the other way. South, maybe, or just forward. His boots moved through the grass with the sound of dry leather, steady and unhurried. Behind him, the wind picked up again, curling around the cairn, stirring the dust, carrying the faint scent of horse and smoke and stone. The land exhaled, and the silence returned. The sun had lifted, but it didn't shine. It lingered behind a thin veil of morning mist. Its light diffused across the sky like milk poured slowly into black coffee. The prairie shimmered beneath it, not with brilliance, but with softness, the kind that comes after long sorrow, when the world begins to move again, though just barely. The cowboy walked. No destination, no path, only direction. Each step seemed to echo in the wide emptiness, though no sound came. His boots bent the grass, left no mark. He carried nothing but the clothes on his back and a small, worn pouch tied to his belt, the same one that once held the braided horsehair charm. His shadow stretched long and thin behind him, cast by a sun that had only just remembered how to rise. Behind him, the cairn stood small against the endless field. No one would find it, unless they were looking with their heart instead of their eyes. It wasn't meant to be found. It was meant to remain. A silence made solid, a pause in the land. The cowboy's figure moved slowly southward, the way rivers lean when they've nothing left to fight. The land began to change as he walked. The grass grew thinner. The soil turned a soft red, rich with clay and bone. Juniper and mesquite took root again, and low hills rolled across the horizon like the knuckles of a sleeping giant. He did not count the hours. Birds circled overhead, high and spare, but none sang. When he finally stopped, it was atop a small rise where the land opened wide in every direction. The kind of place you could see storms coming days away. He stood there for a long time, one hand resting on his belt, the other hanging loose. Then he heard them. Behind him, not close, but near enough to know. The sound of hooves. He didn't turn right away. He waited. Let the sound become rhythm. Let it settle into his bones. Then he turned. The herd had returned. But they didn't rush, didn't close the distance. They moved like fog, spreading slowly across the field behind him, their heads low, their tails still. The same wild band from the night before, or so it seemed. And yet now they were more than that. They were something other, not simply animals, but a presence. Something the land had called up from its deep places. The stallion was among them, the dark one with the white blaze. It stood a little apart, watching the man on the rise, and then it bowed. No sound, no fanfare, just the arch of its neck, the lowering of its great head toward the earth. And behind it, as if some great invisible hand had passed overhead, the rest of the herd followed. One by one, dozens of them, heads bowed, to the earth, to the place, to the moment, to the man. The cowboy did not move, not at first. Then slowly, he removed his hat. His hair was white at the temples, long and matted with dust. He held the hat against his chest, over his heart. The wind tugged gently at his coat, like a child unsure of its strength. And in that moment, the prairie was still. No birds, no breeze, just silence. The kind that exists between breaths, between thoughts, a pause that stretches beyond time, a kind of reverence. The cowboy's eyes drifted shut. He breathed in through his nose, deep, slow, as though tasting the morning itself, then opened his eyes again and looked once more upon the herd. And nodded. Once, a single motion, almost imperceptible. The stallion raised its head, turned, and with it, the herd began to move, not west, not east, but around him, as if the man himself were now part of the landscape, something fixed, something sacred. They passed close, their flanks brushing the grass, their breath clouding in the cool morning. Some looked at him as they passed, others did not. But all moved with purpose, not hurried, not wild, just forward. The cowboy stood still until the last tail flicked out of sight, swallowed again by the open land. Then he lowered his hat to his side and waited. Nothing came, no voice, no sound, just the echo of what had been. He sat down on the rise, knees drawn up, arms resting on them, and looked out over the place where the herd had gone. The earth bore no sign of their passing, not a track, not a trail, only motion remembered in the air. He reached into the pouch at his belt and drew out the horsehair charm. Faded now, loose in one corner. He turned it over in his fingers, then held it up against the morning light. It cast a small shadow on his palm. Then he let it go. The wind took it gently. It did not fall. It floated, drifted like ash from a spent fire until it caught on a blade of tall grass and remained there, turning slowly in the breeze. The cowboy closed his eyes again, not from weariness, but because for the first time in a long while there was nothing more to see. The sun rose higher. Its light stretched wider, reached farther. It spilled across the grass, over the cairn far behind, over the place of gathering, over the man sitting still on the hill. There were no goodbyes, only the wind, only the earth, only the silence that follows something holy.